All right, Missy, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time, and I know that I'm gonna learn a lot, I think, from this conversation. We've known each other for a number of years, goes back quite a bit. But do you want to just kind of introduce yourself and give a little bit about your background?
Sure. My name's Missy Fraze. My background is I've been in education for over 20 years. I have worked in career and technical education is my primary field, both as an educator and as a district leader. I was the director of career and technical education in a large urban district for a number of years. I currently work in a rural Alaska school district in kind of a different capacity, helping the school district with implementation and management of federal grants. So that's kind of my educational work experience background.
Awesome, awesome. You have a great deal of experience just generally in technology too. So this is not meant to be kind of a technical conversation at all, but just wanted to share that I know you have that background and we might leverage that as well. And you're a parent, which is perhaps your most important job,
Yes,
which has a lot to do with AI risk and cybersecurity risk management. From a parent perspective, we know an awful lot about our kids' behavior, and there's probably a lot of things that we protect at home that we don't necessarily protect at school. But anyway,
for sure.
well, let's jump right in. I mean, your expertise, obviously, on this conversation, on this call that I wanted to kind of tap into is around career and technical education. Maybe let's start there. Just generally speaking, what do you feel like is the I don't know, what do you feel like is the landscape, and where do you feel like we're kind of falling down industry-wide in K-12 education in terms of preparing young people for whether it's cybersecurity, if you want to start there, or maybe just in terms of AI, like how are we preparing kids well or not well for the workforce?
Um, I think really in technology in general is just moving at such a rapid pace
Mhm.
that it's just difficult for industry or for education to keep pace with that. I think the evolution makes it difficult because once, education is a big bureaucracy. And it really takes a lot of effort to move policy, to move practices. And by the time we move on those policies and practices, industries beyond that and on to the next thing. And so I think we're kind of always a little bit behind in that arena on the large scale. I think you have pockets of innovation in education. You'll find innovative adopters and innovative educators and pockets of excellence, but I don't see wide scale adoption of um, practices that pace industry on the whole. Um, I think in career and technical education, that is a space that has always been pretty innovative. It's thought outside of traditional models in education. And so you'll see the adoption of pathways and courses that are probably more forward thinking. You see a lot in education right now, um, in career and technical education in particular, trying to make education more relevant for
Yeah.
for kids today.
Mhm.
The access to information that kids have in schools, um, it in their pocket, is really mind blowing when you think about my generation that used to have to go to the library and click through our library catalog using the Dewey Decimal System. Very different world, and so um, I like that in career and technical education, they are trying to be innovative and create pathways and come up with um, innovative ways to help engage students in learning for for their future and make it relevant for them, which I think is why career and technical education does have um, a pretty phenomenal success rate for students in terms if you're looking at metrics like graduation or post-secondary enrollment and persistence, because they really do help students connect the beginning to the end.
Mhm. No, this is not a challenge by any stretch, but I feel like I agree with you. I do. I agree with you for the CTE and the specific pathways. And there's a couple of great schools that you and I know about, some that are near and dear to your heart. CTE, campuses, and I know
Mhm.
there's a couple of great ones down here in Florida where I live now. Um, I guess my concern, though, and just if you have thoughts on this, my concern is, are we relegating that kind of knowledge, information, curricula to those pathways? And is there risk in not maybe just kind of addressing this is kind of a fundamental, this is just part of how we do life
Mhm.
in everything else? Because one of the conversations I had with another one of our experts on this kind of conversation was the question was, should we put AI policy in an AI policy document, or should we put AI policy in terms of the way we deal with AI in all of the appropriate buckets, an HR handbook, or IT handbook, or a student AUP to address
Mhm.
specific AI things rather than pulling it out and separating it? I guess the same kind of perspective. What are your thoughts on putting it into career pathways and technical learning pathways versus, say English language arts or mathematics?
Right. Um, that there are models out there that it is career and college readiness for all.
Hmm. Hmm.
There, and you look at the last centuries of education, especially last century of education, and how it has evolved. Um, and I think education goes through these pendulums. We go one direction really far, and then, oh, that's not the right one, and we'll push back the other way. And I think one of the ways we went all the way there was that college for all, and we're coming back to that middle. And so you do see career and college readiness for all models out there. A lot of times they'll be called academies, and it is all kids wall to wall. And we've seen successful models in Nashville, Akron, Ohio. I've been to both of those school
Hmm.
districts and seen that. And and it really is about um, integrating those skills throughout all your courses. And I think that same thing with AI is, how does that get woven into the fabric rather than a piece of the quilt? And so it's just all students accessing that. But I think the challenge we run into is the adult professional learning side of the house.
Yes. Yes.
How do you create learning systems for adults that are similar to what we want for kids, job embedded?
Hmm.
Job embedded learning is the best type of learning. And in current technical education, that's really a big push right now, is that work-based learning model, and how you're infusing the spectrum of work-based learning. Because that's not just I go to a job. There's really kind of a spectrum of what that looks like. And so I would think that same thing for in education and professional learning. When we bring on new technology, or there's new developments in education, it's that learning piece for the adults that's really critical. And I think they've often been left behind. I was in educational technology for years, not in career technical education, but educational technology in the buildings, and saw and that ties back to that rapid evolution in industry and
Hmm.
technology, and education taking so long to keep pace with that,
Yeah.
that often our teachers are left behind. And you'll have teachers who are, I'm going to learn this on my own, I'm going to do this, and they'll take that on. But there's others that may not have capacity, may not know where to start. So how do you, when you do weave it in, which I think is smart, because it looks different in the HR capacity than it would in the classroom.
Certainly.
That,
Yeah.
that would look different. Um, so, how do you then think of that systemically as a leader and say, okay, this is what we want. Then what do we need? How do we help everybody, not just teachers, of course? Because if you're embedding that into HR, then there's HR professional learning that has to happen. So I think that's going to be a really important thing to think about. And my children, they're in middle school and elementary, and they know all about AI. They know all about Chat GTP. They know all these tools. And so even at home, having these conversations with my daughter about it is really interesting. We're both in education, you're lifelong learners. You're always doing stuff, the next course, the next degree, the next And so we have conversations about that, like, well, how do you use this? How do you use it as a tool versus cheating, or, which ties into that ethical conversation that you and I have had before.
Here's a fun example for you. And I'm being very transparent, very vulnerable in this example. So um, I our kids are, I guess she's what, 2 years older than my oldest, right? Yeah. So, um, so my son, whose name is Sammy, so my son is into the Who Would Win books, the animals that fight, and so he's always asking me questions. Daddy, who would win between a bull shark and a great white or whatever? So I frankly was a little bit tired of it, and so I had my phone in my hand, and so I was on ChatGPT doing something else. I was like, look here, and I pushed the push to talk button. Are you familiar with that? Like the black
Yeah.
button on ChatGPT, and you just have a conversation. So I pushed the button. I was like, here. And he goes, like, looks like, what, incredulously, what is this? And he goes, who would win, a bull shark or, tiger shark? Oh, that's a very good question. I think the tiger shark, da, da, da. And he was just having a conversation with ChatGPT. And I was like, okay, some reprieve, right? But
Mm-hmm.
then I stopped and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't think this through. Do I really want to replace conversations with daddy with this device?
Mm-hmm.
So my point is, even as a quote unquote expert, like we're creating this material to help educators and school leaders deal with these
Yeah.
kind of conundrums. And even I'm making kind of rash decisions at home. So I get it. Like
Mm-hmm.
nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
So back to the conversation, I guess. What advice do you have? What do you have for, say, school leaders? Maybe a teacher who's on a committee, maybe a teacher as an advisor to an IT steering committee or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. A building leader, an instructional leader, or even someone in administration or even a superintendent. What advice do you have for them in terms of that balance between innovation and risk? What advice do you have there?
Um, you know, I always when I think about these things, I think back to I want to start with the use case
Mhm.
because I think that really helps us understand more of the why the technology, why the innovation, and think about the benefits of it first, and how how can I, because we're not going to remember when the iPhone first came out. And you would have thought, oh, they're all gonna be on their phones, they're gonna do
Right.
this, and there was all these like fears that rose up. And a lot of that, there is still like a lot out there around policy, and there's things we haven't been able to unravel even in that area. But I think thinking about the benefits first, and the use case, like how do you use this responsibility responsibly? And interesting you talk about the vulnerability piece. I was, my professor, lifelong learners, we were talking about this in our class, in one of my classes, about AI and the tools we use, and even at the highest level of education, talking about how do you use a tool to your benefit and its intended purpose without cheating
Mhm.
or unethically using a system to write it for you. And there's lots of ways you can do that. And I think it's thinking about what the benefit is as an educator, and whether that's in a language arts class where you're trying to teach, you know, maybe comprehension, or, whatever your subject area is. How do you say, okay, this is a tool. How do I teach the ethical use of it? And I think that's where you embed that, is the ethical use, and you're making that an organic part of the learning instead of just this fear and, oh, we're not going to use it, you can't use it, it's not. And so you really have to figure out what that is. And then when you come to those steering committees or the advisory roles, you bring that to the table. Is we can't just shut it down, it's never going to work. You have to figure out how do I use this? How do I teach my students to use this? And then, from the career and technical education lens, I think this, I'm going to tie back to that work-based learning piece,
Mhm.
because if we're teaching these in the classrooms, I think the best place of application is through work-based learning. And that's where you can teach about ethics, but then you have to apply the ethics in the real world. And work-based learning is how we do that with students, is we get them to apply that in an organic, natural setting.
Well, when you were saying that, that's exactly where my mind went. I was thinking that the teachable moments, that's whenever when something pops up that wasn't expected in class and someone says, "Hey, I've got an app that does this," and then a spontaneous conversation. But that is probably the most uncomfortable place to be as an educator,
Oh yeah.
because you don't have the answer ready. You don't know what the question is. You have no idea what the tool does, but you have to like be ready for that teachable moment. And I think that's the thing that I want everyone who's watching this video, that's what I want people to get from this course is like we have to be ready. And it doesn't mean that we know everything about the tool or know where the technology is going. No, we have to be ready with those critical thinking
Hmm.
and thought exercise skills to keep the conversation moving, but be confident in ourselves that we understand what our ethical foundations are to respond to those things. So I agree. I agree.
Well, and
Um,
I think those teachable moments and those organic conversations, those are those are the real world skills anyway.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
where, we've all gone through our landscape of education, whatever that landscape looked like for you. And there are things I had to memorize and do that I don't remember now, and I
Mhm.
wouldn't unless I went and looked it up. But there are the continuation of the development of those skills, the conversation skills, being able to have that dialogue
Mhm.
within your classroom. That's where the Socratic seminar becomes so
Yes.
powerful in some instances, is because you have that dialogue. And it's not just I'm sitting down to learn this to get the certificate. And within CTE there is that credential of
Mhm.
value, because AI tools, there are hiring um, tools out there now that the
Filter.
AI is the one scanning.
Yep.
They're scanning for your keywords, your certificates, your degrees, your whatever. So having those credentials of value is important, but it can't be at the by diminishing whether you call them soft skills, whether you call them critical skills, whether you call them
Mhm.
employability skills, durable. There's a plethora of names out there for them today. But I think that those conversations and really talking about the ethics of that, because that's going to come into play in the workplace too. I was reading an article not too long ago about um, AI in the creative space, and it might have been marketing, and really talking about um, how do you in your profession, they're seeing a lot of like AI junk come through
Mhm.
at that level, and it's like, this isn't authentic, this isn't. And so being able to work through that, um, and help students understand, yeah, you could, but should
Mhm.
you? And
There's a funny meme that I've seen floating around where I think it's a woman and a woman's typing on her computer and the meme says something like, I thought AI was supposed to do all the boring stuff so I could focus on writing and art. And now all I use AI for is writing and art, and I'm doing all the boring stuff. So we got to be careful.
right.
Um,
Yeah.
switching gears to talk about CTE specifically, which is really where you have just a tremendous amount of experience and a lot to offer. What's going to make us successful preparing young people for those jobs? We used to use that adage. We're teaching kindergartners to be workers, and 20 years from now, we don't even know what the jobs are. Well, you
Yeah.
can throw that out the window. I don't know if I'm going to have a job in 6 months, right? Like I don't know what I'm going to be
Right.
doing. So do you have advice for preparing young people as they exit to the workforce?
um I think that the biggest thing that we can do is, one, you know, create those lifelong learners. And whatever field that is, they're all changing rapidly with technology. Manufacturing is changing at light speeds. I live in the orthopedic capital of the world, and just the technologies that are coming through the manufacturing industry. So if that's the field, how do you embed that within the learning that you know I think in career and technical education we have a challenge, because historically career and technical education, and 20 years ago what was referred to as vocational, was for those kids.
Hmm.
And it's had a stigma that it has been trying to overcome. And I think it's doing a fantastic job and really helping realize that the continuum of learning and that is provided through career and technical education puts students on a pathway to direct entry or apprenticeship or 2-year degree or 4-year degree. I don't think there's a defined off ramp through career and technical education anymore. It's whatever path a student wants to take. I used to do this through our CTE programs and showing students like, yeah, you're in high school right now, and if you want to go direct to work, here's the career choices you have because of the certifications we're going to give you. But if you want more, this is how you're going to get there. And I think being able to teach those lifelong learning skills, but also embedding, going back, let's embed those, let's not lose it, and let's embed those communication, critical thinking, those skills that are going to transfer across industry too.
Hmm.
If you're a good communicator, if you can write, if you have those ethical skills, pull up the wheel of employability skills and making sure we focus on those for students, because I think that's going to be really important as we move forward. Communication isn't just going to happen through when I say digital means, I mean email or something like
Yeah.
that. To me, this is still conversational.
Hmm.
When I'm on a video and I'm having this is conversations we have to have, communication skills we have to have. Everything's going to happen in a text or an email or anything like that. So we have to embed those skills and really ensure that they don't go to the wayside for just certificate development. And again, I'm going to go back to that work-based learning is a great way that those skills get embedded within within a pathway, and you can start to teach those right in the classroom. When we talk about time management, that's an executive functioning skill that we can help embed in our classes for our students early on, and then when they get to the workplace, they've got time management skills. They know to show up on time.
Hmm.
They know their role in a team and what happens when one of your teammates doesn't show up.
So true. So true. Um, I guess as I'm listening to you talk, if there's someone watching this video and they're in that space, they're in that CTE space, they're in that, you know, preparing, whatever the case may be, whether they're
Mm-hmm.
in a small community that doesn't have a CTE pathway type program, but they want to prepare kids for whatever's next. What's your advice for success? How can we do a better job making those programs work? Do you have any advice from your role as a former leader in that specific area?
Um, I One of the things is I think we have to think earlier. A lot of times we don't. I've seen that preparation not happening till it's like 11th and 12th grade. Oh, I'm almost out the door,
Yeah.
and it's so late in the game. And I think especially in communities where I think urban this is where I think urban communities actually have an advantage over rural communities in access to pathways and opportunities. Some of smaller communities might not have as many of those learning pathways for students. They might just be able to provide a limited amount of dual enrollment, AP, CTE, but just that earlier exposure, all the way down into middle school. We used to talk about the fact by fifth grade, kids are already deselecting
Mm.
what they don't want to do. By
Oh,
fifth grade, they're like, I don't want to be, I don't want to be. And oftentimes that's even without exposure. There's not even an exposure. It might be a stigma, it might be a family member, it might be something, but they're already deselecting that. So if we can open that exposure window earlier, and it doesn't have to be really complicated. We used to partner with businesses to come in and do in our middle school, do short experiences with our
oh,
middle
I love
school
that.
students,
I love that.
and just it was a short hands-on activities. We always told them you have 5 minutes to talk, otherwise you've lost a middle school kid. They're done. So you have 5 minutes to introduce yourself, introduce the topic, and then begin your hands-on activity. And then you break that up, and then they start talking about their industry, because we talk in healthcare, for instance. Oftentimes, students' exposure to healthcare is a nurse or maybe a doctor. That might be their kind of scope of reference to healthcare. But the healthcare industry is huge and there's so much within that. So how do you bring in other options for students that don't also fall within that traditional pathway that
Mm,
has the biggest exposure for a student? So we would do that in healthcare, or you could do that in really any industry to expose students to the variety of learning and then help them plan, because that it's really that planning piece to say, okay, whether a student is in, figuring out where they want to go. And then I've already changed careers probably 3 or 4 times since graduating from college. We're
okay.
not saying that kids, you're going to decide on something in high school and that's going to be your forever. That's just not the world we live in anymore. People don't stay in a business, in an industry, or even a business for 30, 35 years like they used to.
Mhm.
Um, but helping them develop those skills where they're thinking about that. What am I good at? What do I like to do? How can I do more of that? And then kind of showing them that pathway. And sometimes showing them that pathway makes them realize they don't want to do it. And there's just as much value in figuring out that
Sure.
I faint when I see blood. So I'm probably out when it comes to that career field, or, so I think there's value in that and teaching them those skills of thinking about their own aptitudes, their own skills, their own passions. And how do you put that into your learning, and giving a variety of ways for students to access that learning too. I think that's one of the better outcomes of the pandemic was
You're right. You're right.
education rapidly opened its doors to um, innovative learning opportunities. And it really, I think, put parents in the driver's seat a little bit more than
More than they wanted to, I
previous.
think.
Yes, for some of us more than we wanted to. Yeah. But also it just gave them the opportunity to see there's other learning pathways. And that's challenged school districts too, to think about how do we create value for families that they want to stay and keep their kids in our community schools and our neighborhood schools versus choosing, a national homeschool program or a state homeschool program or a different way of learning. And so schools have had to create that value too and think, okay, and some of that is through different learning programs. You have a variety of options out there today.
Well, I've heard you say a few things about outside partners to the school as well. Do you want to maybe just touch on that? Like, what's the role of partnership and how have you been successful getting partnerships with schools to do that?
Yeah, the industry partners have been, for me, really important in, um, for one, building relevance for learning. So, initial years, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago at this point, but when I was the director of CTE, one of the things we wanted to do is to really strengthen partnerships between our teachers and industry, because teachers, traditional teachers, and even so in CTE, most are traditional pathways. You have really gone through the continuum of education, K-12,
Hmm.
post-secondary, and you've rolled right back into a school building.
Hmm.
So the traditional network of industry may not always be there. And so it's like, well, I teach computer science. We've had teachers teaching computer science that wasn't their industry background, but they've gone and they've
Yeah,
skilled up, they've taken the classes, they teach computer science, but they don't know anybody from industry. So we created a structure, a professional learning structure. And our team, we just did a blitz and we reached out to every industry partner we could think about and created
beautiful.
a, a day-long professional development to kick off the school year. And we brought industry to the table. We separated out. So here's my hospitality and culinary teachers. We had hospitality at the table. And
Hmm.
really it was about the goal was let's develop the partnership at the people level. Let's put our teachers in touch with the industry where they feel like they have somebody in the community they can lean into and say, hey, I'm curious about this, or I want this. But the secondary part of that is industry really got to see the level of learning happening in the classroom. And I think they were surprised
Yeah.
because that's not what they're used to. That's not the classroom that they probably went to a more traditional liberal art leaning education that used to be in front of us. So industry was surprised. And so we would build those partnerships up where the teacher would have industry who could come in. And so our industry partners would come in like, oh, I want to do this special project, or culinary teachers would invite them in for like a cooking challenge or something like that. There's all kinds of ways they would bring the partners in. And then we eventually built up to where we had students doing internships after they had taken enough. I think we had 2 courses in a pathway. I just have 2 courses, and then they'd have to take a preparation course. Our students were in a preparation. We didn't just like, here you go out to industry, because there is a lot of, there's still a lot of those, I'm going to go back to those soft, professional, durable tech skills, whatever you want to call them. There's still a lot of that our students don't have. And so if you just put them into the workforce through like an internship or something, they may not be successful. And I've seen that happen even for high flying students. Teacher puts them in, like, these are my high flyers, put them in. Within weeks, all 3 didn't have a job because they didn't have those skills.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know how to take initiative. They didn't know when I was sitting at the desk that if I didn't have anything to do, maybe I could go empty the trash, or maybe I could look for something else to do. They didn't have some of those skills. And so building those pathways in a way, and then bringing those industry partners in that can help reinforce that, and then teach those in a safe space. Like, that's the students' opportunities to fail forward. Oh, okay, because they're learning. And we had students who did internships and have gone on into careers with those companies. And so the benefit for our industry partners is it's almost pipelining for them, because they get
That's what I'm
this,
hearing.
they're getting an opportunity to connect with these young adults who have already really started to take an interest in a particular pathway. And so they'll enter in at an entry level. And, some fields today and learning options today are so much different than they were 20 years ago, that a lot of people are doing the blended work, learn and earn model, where not just a traditional apprenticeship learn and earn, but I'm working by day and taking school by night. And the flexibility of that is much different today for students. And so you build those partnerships, and yeah, the end goal is to have these robust learning experiences, but just to even have those at the classroom level really helps those teachers. And the feedback we got from teachers was, I feel validated in what I do. That was their feedback. In
Awesome.
getting to sit with the industry partners, is to feel validated.
Awesome.
So yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, that's what we're all seeking, right? We just want to be validated. We want to be heard. We want our voice to matter. We want to be participant,
Mm-hmm.
right? So,
Yeah.
well, kudos all around. I just love everything I heard there. That's great. And as a hiring manager, as someone who is looking for a pipeline of young people who are prepared for that workforce, overseeing
Mm-hmm.
a security operation team, overseeing an internal IT team, network operations, things like that. That's exactly what I'd like to hear, is that people are listening to industry. They know what we're looking for, and creating opportunities for internships and on the job, not just for the teachers, but for the kids too.
And
Brilliant.
I just want to, one more thing on that though, too, is to think about, if you're a CTE leader, district leader, you have that role. One of the most important things for you is to actually be out there,
Mm.
not being behind the desk, and out there, there's 2 ways that you're out there. And one is I spend a lot of time out in my programs. I'm out in there, I'm seeing what they're doing, I'm meeting with teachers, seeing what the students, because then you get that, I truly understand what's happening. But the other part is I would spend time at industry. So, our community had a technology forum that met, I might have been monthly. So I connected with the gentleman who ran that. He was a CIO. And then that relationship where me being involved in that forum, and it was like a luncheon. I'd go have lunch with them and we'd talk. They actually helped us. We did an entire process of um, we needed to understand what our community IT needs were. We wanted to understand more. What are the skills you're looking for? And so we used one of their luncheons to really do a kind of a feedback session to understand how we needed to develop our program better to meet their needs. But going out to the chamber, if you have a chamber, or municipality, or we call them municipalities, but it might be your local government meetings or any sort of local industry um, organizations, and networking in there, that's the leadership job. That's the being present out in the community, because that's how you make connections to build the trust from industry to come in, because it's hard, like it's intimidating for industry to come into education too.
It
And
is.
so you have to help build those bridges where they start to feel comfortable. Okay, yeah, I'll come in, and then you have to help make those connections and build those relationships out in the community as well simultaneously.
I'll tell you right now, you actually just sparked that in me. I'm a member of ISACA, of ISC squared. I serve on the board for InfraGard. All those organizations, we all need CTEs. Professionals need CTEs too. And so one way to fulfill that is to actually go and work with kids or work with teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody who's watching this, shoot me a note if you want more information about that. But think about those nonprofit organizations, those professional organizations. I'm sure they'd be great connects to make as well. Yeah.
Yeah, another big one is human resource societies. They're a
Oh
big
yeah.
one. We
Yeah.
partnered with the Human Resource Society, and we had a course called Career Ready. And it was the whole point of, I talked about that preparation for internships and launching. We partnered with our SHRM, our local SHRM, and they would actually review student resumes,
Oh
and
wow.
they would
Yeah.
do mock interviews with students. So that took the pressure off teachers to do it, because we had our industry professionals who came in and did that. And we actually had a student whose resume was mistaken for an actual resume for an open job, and she was called for an open job.
You
And so
can't be
it
more
was
successful than that, right? I mean,
right. Yeah. And so it's those opportunities that are really important.
so if anyone wants to contact you, we'll make sure to include your contact information
Sure.
with this video. Thank you so much, Missy, for your time. Really, really appreciate it. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thanks, Sam. I absolutely enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Hey, thanks for watching. As you know, our mission at Make It Secure is to empower confident, secure, and ethical use of technology. If you want to see more secure conversations like the one you just watched, be sure to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to see the next conversation.